Okay. Well, hi everybody. It's always fun to be the first speakers after lunch, so yay! Looking forward to lots of excited faces here. So Mike just started with setting a great context about what maritime fog is for the coast redwood ecosystem. And ever since I was a little kid, I guess I would say, growing up in California, it was sort of drilled into my head, redwoods and fog go together like peanut butter and jelly, botanists and hand lenses, me and lunch, you get the idea. There's such a tight correlation between where we find the coast redwood ecosystem along the coast of California. The coast redwoods extend into Oregon about 15 miles and go all the way down the coast through Big Sur. And yet, as much as we think of fog being synonymous with where we find redwoods, there are places in the Redwood Range where we don't get any fog. And fog is such an ephemeral, dynamic feature of this coastal climate. It's hard to predict how much fog you're going to get in a given year, depending on where you are in the environment, and even in the course of the day. As someone who made the attempt during graduate school to chase fog and get there before fog would come into my field site, and I messed it up a lot. It's actually really hard to predict. So Mike went into some of what we know about fog so far, and I'm just going to summarize it in some general points. And then I'm going to give you a few illustrative examples about this, and then talk about a conundrum that's come up with the recent research that's coming out of the coast redwood ecosystem. But basically, as I just said, fog is an ephemeral resource. The first studies that were published on fog on the coast were simply documenting the presence of fog, looking at how it was getting into the forest and where, looking at the exposure that plants have. The next step was really more of that eco-physiological approach to look and say, well, how much hydration are these plants actually getting from fog exposure? And there have been several studies that have shown how much plant water potential, for example, goes up when plants have exposed to fog, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Fog brings in nitrogen. It's been documented in the redwood forest that is a delivery mechanism that has an effect on sequoia cedrovitans in particular. And then sort of my last point, and the title I gave this talk is that species have a varied response. No single vascular plant in a coast redwood forest is responding like everybody else. They're responding in their own way, as to their own physiology. And so we try to think about holistically, what does fog mean for the redwood forest? We still have way more questions than answers, and the longer that I work on fog, the more convinced we have no idea. So I'm going to talk to you about, this is a paper that came out, Steve Burgess and Todd Dawson in 2004, and this was looking at crown hydration up in the top of redwood trees in Sonoma County at a ridge-top forest. It's heavily inundated by fog, really all year round, but it certainly peaks during the summer months. They were putting in sap flow sensors to measure the velocity and the directionality of sap flow movement. And what they found, pretty pronounced result that during fog events, they were actually seeing a reversal. Sap flow was moving in the opposite direction, moving from the crown down towards the bottom of the tree. And that's not something that you typically see in plants. Evapotranspiration, water's moving up. So that was really noticeable. What could be the explanation of that? My work in graduate school was to look at, well, yeah, what is going on with water going into plants? Is it common? And the phrase we call it is foliar uptake. And it isn't just leaves, it can be stems and leaves in combination, providing a conduit for small amounts of water to get into the plant. I say small amounts of water because when we do measure the amount of water going in, it is very small. But there's such a large surface area, especially for large plants, that it can make for a meaningful amount of water. The graph we're looking at here looks at individual leaves and their ability, how much the percent increase of water happened after fog exposure. And so that's what the percentage is here. And then it's a range of different vascular plants from the coast redwood forest. Here's Sequoia sempervirens, about 3% in this experiment that we did, about 3% increase in hydration per individual sprig or shoot from a redwood branch. But what's so interesting to me is there were species that were doing a whole lot more. And what led me down the route to studying ferns was really the phenomenal response that Polystichum unitum was having. It had a tremendous increase. And then there were a lot of species that had a little bit, you can measure it, but it wasn't a lot. That includes huckleberry, and then interestingly, almost negligible or no foliar uptake in a few species. Oxalis oregano was one of them, Umbellularia californica was another. So some didn't seem to be doing a lot of foliar absorption. In the field, what this looked like to us when we would go out and take measurements on just a handful of species. So in this study, we were looking at Sequoia sempervirens, Umbellularia, and Polystichum, all species that are common in the understory. We would go out and take physiological measurements every 6 weeks, before, during, and after the fog season. And we found some really interesting patterns and things that really surprised me that I couldn't predict. Basically what we found, and the open circles here at the top, that's our coast redwood. And then, it's probably impossible to see from the background, but in the middle here in this panel, those are dark triangles, that's our bay, and then the fern. The species are responding very differently during the fog season. Now in California, you know we get the most fog. In the summertime, usually we don't get any rain in the summer, at least that's how this all worked typically. And what was so interesting to see is how sword fern here, Polystichum just shot up in its water potential. So as the water potential increases, it becomes less negative, gets closer to zero, showing a greater hydration state. And Polystichum could be almost completely hydrated at the end of the summer. This is a very shallowly rooted species, no water storage organs, but it clearly was responding to the fog that was coming in, and our conclusion is it's so good at foliar uptake, it was really just drinking that water in above ground. It was also incredibly variable year to year. This central panel was 2008, and we had a lot less fog in this year, and the species didn't get as hydrated over the course of the summer. But in the last year we had a lot more fog. And where we took measurements during fog events, that's where you see an asterisk, really the most hydration, especially for Polystichum. So even species growing in the exact same patch of the forest with the same canopy cover above, presumably the same fog exposure, having incredibly different responses to that fog water resource coming in. So just to summarize, there are numerous short-term benefits of fog exposure. It's changing the light environment. It's like putting a lid on a glass of water. It's helping those plants conserve the water they have and recalibrate with water below ground in the soil. And it's providing that direct water resource. So it seems like, well, duh, fog must be really good. So we were really surprised then when new research on Sequoia sempervirens was raising some questions about really how important fog is. Alison Carroll is a dendrochronologist at Humboldt State University, and if you haven't seen her paper that was in PLOS One in 2014, I highly recommend it. She's put together the longest tree ring record for coast redwood. It goes back to the year 474. So it's incredibly interesting to look at the patterns in the growth histories of coast redwood up and down the whole ecosystem range. And combining that insight from how much the trees were growing year by year, going back in time, with whole tree trunk measurements, we've been able to look at the production of wood for large coast redwoods over time. So just to give you an example, and I won't go into the technical details of how this is calculated, but here's a tree where you can see the central trunk or bole in black. At the year 1500, this is how it's approximated the size, and then skipping forward 500 years to the year 2000, how much the bole had changed. This is a skeletal diagram of its branches and limbs and where the trunk is divided, but you can ignore the colors. But this is basically the skeleton of the woody structure of this tree. The blue line is a trace of wood production in cubic meters over time. So there's no, I'm going to show you this same graph condensed with many trees on the same figure in the next panel, but I just want to talk you through so you know what it means. So when you get a higher spike in the blue line, it just means wood production has gone up, really high wood production. The tree's growing vigorously and putting on a lot of wood. And where you see it going down, it means wood production is going down. What's undeniable here is just this increase and how much wood production is going on, especially in the last 100 years. Okay. So this is work by Stephen Sillett from Humboldt State University. And Sequoia sempervirens are in the left two panels. It's compared with Sequoia dendron, its sister taxa in the Sierra. If we start in the upper left-hand corner, this is showing those same wood traces in a faint black or gray line for individual trees spanning different ages. So we're looking at trees that are as young as 200 years old, all the way to a tree that's almost 2,500 years old. Where you see a blue best fit line, it means that over this period of time, which is 751 to 1850, wood volume on average was increasing. So blue line, growth is increasing. Red line, opposite trend, the wood production rate was going down. And if it's black, it just means it's neutral. It kind of was bouncing along at the same rate. So, it's really dramatic if you break these panels apart on a PowerPoint and then switch to the most recent century, but I think you guys can follow along. When you move down and you look at what's happened in the 20th century, you see massive increase in those wood production rates. And throughout the Coast Redwood Range, whether we're measuring trees in Big Sur or up in Humboldt and Delmark County, wood production was going up tremendously. For those of you who are interested in the giant sequoia, really the same trend was happening. So I'm not focusing on that today, and they certainly don't get fog. But it is interesting to note that these giant trees, especially even the old ones, are having the same sort of growth surge. Mike already talked about Jen Johnston and Todd Dawson's findings about fog frequency and this reported decline over the last century. So the big conundrum that those of us who are studying fog and are thinking of measuring all these short-term impacts and how beneficial fog is for hydration status is, how could it be that redwoods are growing faster even though the fog is declining? And I can't tell you the answer. We're still trying to figure that out. But I think it really is having us think hard about how fog works in combination with other aspects of climate. When we look at the same climate trends for other aspects of the coast redwood ecosystem, how much precipitation, how much warming, all those other variables, we realize that there's still been historically a lot of rain coming into the coast redwood forest. We may even have a surplus amount of rain. So even with the drought, it seems like the redwood trees have been very buffered from those drought impacts. So we think about the fog decreasing, and we think about the redwoods growing faster, it's suggesting that they're benefiting from something in the environment that's changed. I'm sure we could talk about carbon dioxide has increasing, air quality has also been improving. A bulk of that growth surge has happened since the 1970s, and that's when many air restrictions came into play about burning and other particulate matter being put into the atmosphere. So is it a cleaning up of our air that's also a contributing factor? It's really a question that's still unresolved. But we have to think about the fact that redwoods have grown in much warmer times. They have grown really well with warmth, so we don't think it's just the warming trend. And it may be that increased light levels because of the fog decline has been beneficial. Now there has to be a catch, there has to be if only because we still have enough rainwater. So we're not jumping to too many conclusions about this because we can't draw out of the tree ring record exactly what was going on year to year and ultimately what are the environmental factors that have driven this growth surge. But it's very undeniable that the redwoods have been growing very well, even with fog and decline. When we go back and we think about fog as this ephemeral resource, there's absolutely no question and there's no evidence that suggests that in the short term, especially in years when rain hasn't been as plentiful, fog exposure, the number of hours the leaves are wet, directly translates into improved hydration status, which has been shown to raise photosynthetic rates and certainly can support growth. So we know that that's true, but for long term, especially for the big trees, the big redwoods, I have to ask, they really need a lot of light, so can they get by without fog? And as I mentioned in the beginning, when we were talking about the distribution of redwood trees, there are redwood forests that get little, if no fog, and those trees are growing well. So how important is fog? It seems locally important, it seems important in the moment, but the big long-term trajectory of how these redwood trees are going to fare whether fog stays the same or declines or even becomes more plentiful. We're still trying to figure that out. Okay, with that, I'm happy to take questions.